Park and Recreation. I'd like to make note that all members are present, or at least were. I don't know what Ms. Sims, Councilwoman Sims is. I'm sure she'll be here. So if we can please get approval of our last meeting's minutes, which are from March 26, 2018. Been moving second. If there's any discussion, all in favor? Okay, thank you. Don't have anything to come before us right now. We have one old piece that's on hold that I believe is maybe addressed during general session. So we have Mr. Valley before us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Park and Recreation Committee. The mayor, the administration strongly supports this resolution before you. In fact, I asked that you guys suspend the rules last week, but it's my understanding that Coach Drew Joyce will be here in attendance this evening with some of his players. At least I think that was the intent there. But this is a historic resolution. I mean, St. Vincent St. Mary's boys basketball team has set the state record for 8 state championships in men's basketball. So this is an incredible feat, and I would ask that you suspend the rules on this evening.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Fusco, did you have anything you want to add to that?
As I stepped out for a second, but I'm sure Mr. Valley, his comments are accurate, and just ask that we do pass that this evening. I understand that Coach will be by this evening at 7, along with some of the players. And so I've talked to the president to ask if we take them out of order and approve it this evening. Certainly would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions or comments from members of council, members of committee? If not, if I could get a motion for a favorable report with suspension of rules. Okay, it's been moved in second for a favorable report with suspension of rules. If there isn't any discussion, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. And now we'll have a presentation from Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. While I'm talking, Bridget actually has nice color copies of sort of a handout, or John, thank you, John, we'll be passing out. We're incredibly excited, we being the administration, the Office of Integrated Development, excited to talk to you about a new partnership and a new initiative that we launched today. But take you back to our capital budget discussions. As we know, this council has felt strongly for many, many years that investment in our parks and our parks infrastructure needs to be greater, that parks serve a vital purpose in our city around neighborhood development and neighborhood revitalization, and we couldn't agree more. The challenges we face are one of resource constraints and how to make the biggest return on investment in terms of our parks and our parks infrastructure. And so we came up with a new idea that we had proposed in the capital budget that council passed, where we identified a small portion, $250,000, for what we called public space improvements. And at that time we talked about the potential of an initiative to invite residents to basically pitch their park, to do some citizen-led engagement, purposeful engagement around what citizens wanted to see for their park, and then use those dollars between as many as 2 parks, 2 to 3 parks, to make it happen for them over the next 18 months. I'm proud to say that we followed up on that in the form of the Akron Parks Challenge and a new partnership that we've announced today with the Akron Parks Collaborative, which is an offshoot, if you will, that's probably a better term than that, of Friends of the Metro Parks, which is an organization that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. So I'll introduce my colleagues to my immediate left, talk a little bit, and then invite them to say a few words, and then we'll ask for, obviously, invite questions and comments. So my immediate left is Bridget Ambrisco. Bridget is the Executive Director of Friends of the Metro Parks, as well as the creator, if you will, of Akron Parks Collaborative. She's an Akron resident, and she will serve as project lead for the Akron Parks Challenge. And to the left of Bridget is Dan Rice, whom I know many of you know. Dan is the illustrious head of the Akron and Erie Canalway Coalition, but also our #1 convener around Akron Civic Commons and the work that's being done there. So first I want to talk about the partnership. we as an administration, in many ways through the Civic Commons project, have been exposed to the way parks and recreation are being done in other cities across the country, and in particular parks. If you look at the Philadelphia model, I know many of you went and saw Mitchell Silver, who's the Commissioner for Parks and Recreation for the City of New York, a few weeks ago, that was sponsored by Akron Civic Commons. But not just major cities, also cities like Grand Rapids, Michigan, and others have started to view their park system, again, as key to neighborhood revitalization. But they also face the same resource constraints outside of New York. I still want, just a little bit of Mitchell Silver's $1 billion capital budget for parks. They are resource constrained. And so many of these cities, years and years ago, started to develop friends networks, friends of the city parks. They are, and oftentimes in many cities, started organically. Sometimes they're started by the city itself or through a partnership like the one we're announcing today. But the idea is to do a couple things. One, to get citizens involved in their neighborhood parks from the standpoint of what do they want to see in their parks, and then we help to facilitate that, whether through public investment or through private investment. But then also to change the model from it's all on the city to steward parks to it's a partnership between the city and the communities we serve to steward our parks, whether that be clean and safe, all the way to what types of park atmosphere are you trying to create, and helping to keep that park clean, safe, and effective for the neighborhood. So we are a little bit behind in developing that. We, outside of Keep Akron Beautiful, that does a great job with Adopt a Site program, our Friends Network for City of Akron Parks is almost non-existent, other than, but you all know who those neighborhood champions are in your wards that care about that park and email you and call you, and many of you are the champions for those parks. So the idea is to galvanize the community around our parks and create a friends group network all across the city, bringing together folks and citizens who care about their parks and want to see them stewarded well, and want to see both public and private investment made over time. So we at the city don't really have the setup for that. We have a parks maintenance department, which does a great job of trying to maintain the parks. And we have a recreation department that does a great job programming the parks. But there really isn't anyone anymore that wakes up every day thinking about how the parks should look, feel, and be designed. And we wanted to try and change that, not necessarily through staffing up, because we know we don't have the resources we once did, but how can we, through partnership with the two people sitting to my left and others, create a partnership where we can create a citizen-led movement around what our parks should look like, and at least with our small dollars that we've allocated this year, create a spark. So that's sort of the background a little bit behind the partnership on the Akron Parks Collaborative. The Akron Parks Challenge is our first initiative around this. And again, we talked a little bit about this at the capital budget, but we didn't have the details at the time. Now we do, and that's what you have in front of you. The Akron Parks Challenge is a collaboration between the City, the Knight Foundation, Akron Civic Commons, and the Akron Parks Collaborative. The idea is built off of the Knights Cities Challenge and the Knights Arts Challenge, which we should be very familiar with. We've had the last couple of years, where we're going to ask two very simple questions of citizens. What park do you want to change? What's your vision for it? And why are you or your organization the right person or organization to bring that neighborhood together to make change happen? And that second question is actually much more the focus. We are inviting citizens to pitch their park and why they want to bring their community together to work with Bridget, who's going to serve as our project manager, the city, and Akron Civic Commons and the Knight Foundation to transform their city park. We're going to go through, between now and the end of April is the submission time. We want to work with every city council member to come to your ward meetings, to get in touch with those neighborhood champions that you know well, to make sure they submit their parks. That's going to be, and Bridget will talk to that in a moment. We are going to have city council representation on the selection committee. We're going to be picking two parks because we want to make major impacts with the $250,000 that we've set aside between those two parks. We're looking for mainly champions, neighborhood-level champions, and neighborhood-level organizations that can demonstrate to the selection committee that they are the group or person to galvanize their neighborhood. So we're not looking for somebody that has a perfect site plan or has everything ready to go. We're more wanting to make sure that you can bring people to the meetings, get the neighborhood engaged, and we will help the neighborhood facilitate that dialogue. We will have council representation in the form of Council President Margot Somerville will serve on the selection committee, and we specifically did not want any city staff on the selection committee. So it'll be Council President Somerville, Bridget, Dan Rice, Kyle Kudici from the Knight Foundation, and they will be doing the review. We will make all of the first round submissions available to all council members because we want your input. We want to know who those, you know your wards and your neighborhoods best. So if there's a particular park that you want us to consider more than others, or a neighborhood champion who's been working for years and you want to see their submission rise to the top, we want to hear that. The second round is, again, mirrored right after the Knight Cities Challenge. There are 7 simple questions geared toward trying to understand whether you have the capacity or your organization has the capacity to bring the neighborhood together to design, co-design the new improvements to the park. So a couple things about the Park Challenge submission. We want people to know that it's easy. Anyone can submit. You don't have to, this is not an essay contest. It's a very simple form on the Akron Civic Commons website, which Dan can talk to in a moment. And that it's not imperative you know exactly what you want to do with your park. We want people with passion, and we want people that can demonstrate their ability to bring their neighbors out, to work with our partners to help the neighborhood design the changes they want to see. So we hope to have decided on those 2 parks by June 1st, and I will stop there because I don't want to steal Bridget's thunder in terms of what she has planned. But the only other thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, is that even before we brought the capital budget in with this concept, the mayor commissioned the planning department to do the first comprehensive parks analysis that we know of in many, many years. Jim Ashley is here, who spearheaded that, and Helen as well. We made that public today, and it's available to city council members. Council office can download it. It's a very thick document. But that's why, that's the only reason I didn't print it off for every single one of you, because I'm trying to save trees, because it's a parks, thing. But it's available. Every single city park was documented for its condition, its origin, its place within the city, and potential uses for that park or current uses for that park. So it's a soup to nuts analysis of all the land that we steward. There's also an executive summary for council members and for the public that's attached to that as well. There are some great things that we should be boasting about. For example, we boast a level of service, which is the per acre per 1,000 resident level of service that's double the national average. But that doesn't mean that just because we have a lot of great parks that we are stewarding them well. And so the whole idea here isn't to fix all of our parks in one foul swoop. It's about forming a partnership that can do that over time. And the Akron Parks Challenge is all about creating that spark within neighborhoods and within communities to get people to think about their parks again in a new and different way. This isn't necessarily about active recreation. It's not necessarily a way of getting a new baseball field built or a new football field, unless that's what the community wants. But it's about getting the community around the table, around their neighborhood park, and letting them decide what type of improvements they want to see, and then up to $100,000 per park based on the capital budget, we're going to work to implement those recommendations that the neighborhood decided. So with that, I want to give Bridget an opportunity to talk about how she's going to steward the project over the next 18 months, and hopefully longer than that. We hope this isn't the first and only Akron Parks Challenge. And then I'll invite Dan to talk a little bit about how Civic Commons is involved.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited about this project. I've been working in parks for my entire career. Some of you I know from my early days at Cascade Locks Park Association, and I've been working for Friends of Metro Parks for about 6 years now. So I'm very excited about this new organization that we've formed, the Akron Parks Collaborative. The whole point is to get people involved. I'm not sure I can expand much on what James said because he covered the program very well. But I will definitely be looking to you to help identify those champions in each neighborhood, especially as those 2 parks are picked, because we want this to come from them. That's the way to get to community revitalization, is to have the people that use the parks actually make decisions about how they use the parks. We want it activated. When you bring more people to the parks, it's safer. So there's all kinds of great things that can come from this project. And as we go, the idea is we will identify those people that are really excited about this and form little subcommittees for them to help maintain, for them to help keep those parks programmed, so that it's not, let's go in, let's make an improvement, let's move to the next one and just hope that everything stays together. The idea is then we'll still be there to support those groups, those residents, to make sure that those parks are sustained. So we'll be going through, the first thing that we will do is to look at how the parks are actually used, actually do some studies on that, and physically watch how people are using it. And then we'll be doing public meetings to really engage the committee, or the community, excuse me, and go from there.
The one other thing before I lied, I have other things to say, but before I let Dan go in, I want to make clear, while this initial first year of Akron Parks Challenge, we want to identify 2 parks to go through this process, it's likely, in fact, it's going to happen, that there are going to be way more submissions that we could get involved with today outside of the Parks Challenge. A lot of times we're anticipating that we're going to have communities that want to do beautification, that want to mulch, that want some different things that are more low-hanging fruit than a large investment of time, effort, and money. That's not to say that those parks wouldn't be eligible for a future Parks Challenge, but keep in mind that one of the grander mission of the Akron Parks Collaborative is to create that friends group network. We don't need the Akron Parks Challenge, or a park doesn't need to be selected for the Akron Parks Challenge to form that group and get going. John Malish, who's our city arborist, does a fantastic job of getting up every day trying to improve the city. He has a lot of resources that a lot of people probably wouldn't know he has to get in there and do low-hanging fruit projects within the parks. Bridget, through our Parks Collaborative now, the Akron Civic Commons, is looking to expand its footprint over time. But Bridget in particular, our partnership with the Akron Parks Collaborative is to develop that network. So I want to just make it clear for council members and for the public that we anticipate, in fact, we are planning on getting involved in way more parks than just the 2 that are selected. The idea is to get that spark going, get those folks to submit their ideas and start working with as many as we can possibly take on. So, Dan, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. This is a really exciting opportunity, and in many ways it really builds upon the work that many of you folks are familiar with regarding the Akron Civic Commons, which is built upon 4 main pillars, the first of which is civic engagement. As James and Bridget very clearly stated, the key is making sure that the residents and their voices are heard. Because one of the things we've learned, and we've learned a lot of lessons with Akron Civic Commons, is that in the past there maybe has been a legacy of things being done to and not with. There's been things promised and not delivered. And so what we'd like to be able to do is take those lessons that we've learned from the Akron Civic Commons and do it all across the city. Because as James said, it shouldn't just be 1 or 2 parks. We're learning a lot, Lock 2 and 3 and 4 in downtown Akron. We've certainly learned a lot at Summit Lake, as Councilwoman Sims can attest to, because she's been very active in those meetings, and Councilman Freeman as well. And so we just are really honored to be a part of this process. But as James said, we're not looking to maybe just do 2 parks. There's no reason why we can't take this process and apply it citywide. And it is all about civic engagement, co-stewarding, co-creating and co-designing. It doesn't matter, quite frankly, what I think. With all due respect to Bridget or James, doesn't matter what we think. What matters is what the community thinks. Because what we've learned is that parks are great spaces where everybody can come together. Doesn't matter what your income is. Doesn't matter your education, your race, your gender, your experience. It's free, it's accessible. And the more that we create these spaces where everybody comes together, we can have those random conversations, we get a chance to get to know everybody better, and we truly have that social economic mixing, which is really a key component of creating great civic common spaces. And so we're really honored to be a part of this. Our role is really twofold. We are going to assist with the communications and outreach. The citizens can go on to akronciviccommons.org and submit their ideas. And as James said, we want as many ideas as possible, because that way we're going to have a good process. The other role that we're going to serve is the fiscal agent for the organization, because we already have that set up within our organization. We serve as the fiscal agent for many City of Akron projects, including Akron Civic Commons, the Akron Bicycle Plan, and also from a technical assistance standpoint, because we have over 3 years experience of working on creating these great civic common spaces. And so we're looking forward to working with you and all residents of the City of Akron on this great project. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one final comment, and then I'll happily turn it back over to you for question and comment. Just to clarify, the $100,000 per selected park in the Akron Parks Challenge, that does come directly from the capital budget. The fiscal agent role that Akron Civic Commons and Ohio Ordinary Canalway Coalition are playing for us, that is for the NIGHT funds. NIGHT has committed to support Bridget and our project with initial allocation of funds to support the community engagement aspect, so cost of putting on meetings, food, marketing and promoting of the meetings, et cetera, so, and marketing and promotion of the total challenge. So they will be stewarding those, so obviously we would be stewarding our own funds. So with that, happy to take questions, comments.
Okay, thank you. One question comes to mind real quick before I ask members of the committee is, there's a Park and Rec advisory group that was commissioned to do some study and some work, and I'm hoping that they will be, so that these things won't be separate, that they will play a major role, as part of the advisory group. I have some other things, but I want to give members of the committee a chance to ask questions. So are there any questions by members of the committee? Mr. Freeman?
I'm assuming from what I'm hearing, like Summit Lake, Park East, those are probably not included in this, are they? Or
So we are not restricting any City of Akron park. Now, I'm sure deference would be given that those particular parks are part of the Akron Civic Commons footprint, that they are getting some TLC that way, but we purposely did not want to restrict any City of Akron park from being eligible.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else from council before I go back to ask some questions? Councilwoman Sims?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things we really learned in this whole process with the Civic Commons is when you have disempowered communities, it's really hard to get those folks. Although there is a great need, how do we do that work? That took more than 2 months to really get people to know this was about them, for the very reasons that Mr. Rice articulated in terms of things happening to them, without them, and the money runs out and people run out. So how do we make sure they don't miss out on a grand opportunity, because a disempowered community is kind of a disengaged community, and that's part of a disinvestment psychology. And so I don't know how we do that in 2 months to make sure there's a fairness and kind of an equity in making sure that everybody really gets a true opportunity. There are some people who have a built-in mechanism they can get activated pretty quickly and get folks coming and excited about, but there's other pockets within the city that don't have that kind of mechanism. So that would be one of my concerns.
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. While there's a deadline for submissions, just because you need to get going at some point. We don't lose the warm weather months. We know that there aren't that many, unfortunately, in our neck of the woods. In order to do the work that Bridget's talking about, we really, 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 and I'll invite Bridget to talk more about this, would be looking to you and to anyone in your neighborhood that Bridget can follow up with. I mean, she will go door to door if need be to get the word out about the challenge over the next couple weeks to make sure submissions are in. While there is an online form that we encourage people to use, if someone wants to write out their answer to the first two questions, we've talked about and we've worked with John Valley to make sure that this is in every community center, and that if somebody walks up to the community center desk and says, here's my submission, that it'll get back to Bridget and we can get that logged. So just because it's online doesn't mean that it's the only way. But I think what's even more important to note is that we wholeheartedly agree that equity is definitely a lens we're looking at. It's very important to us. So we have no shortage of parks all over the city in every neck of the woods that are in need of tender love and care. I guarantee that there are people within each one of those neighborhoods who cares about their park. We just have to find that folks. So we will be looking to you. We definitely are here asking for help as well. That's why we have Bridget as our project manager. She's got the time and flexibility. Anywhere, anytime you want her to go and talk about the Parks Challenge, we're there. And then once they're selected, we totally understand that it's going to be more than just one meeting to really get the voice of the community heard, to go through a facilitated process, as Dan and Bridget have talked about, and again, invite Bridget to talk about how she sees it going. That's why we're not even anticipating that we'll put shovel in the ground this year even. It may take all of the warm weather months to do the community impact, to do some demonstration projects, to test ideas, and ultimately come up with what the community, the majority of those that are engaged want to see. And so in 2019, we can really put the permanency in, potentially. But if we could do it quicker, we will. But we want to allow for the time so that we do hear the voice of those communities and those two that we select, and not just in the two that are selected for the challenge, but in any community that we go into to try and form the Parks Friends Group network. But Bridget, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I'll just reiterate what he said. I will go to your ward meetings or the tea that you have set up and talk to people about the program. I've also got the flyers in all of the libraries that are actually within the city of Akron, and I've sort of asked librarians to be available if people do want to put it online. But again, we will take it in written form or however. But we really are looking to you to help us find those champions, those people that we can work with, and to help us get the word out. Share it on Facebook if you've got that connection with your community. But anything I can do, I'm available.
The only other thing I'll add, no, Dan, absolutely. Anyone who's interested in the park, it doesn't have to be that they have, again, a grand idea for beautification. It could be safety is the reason they care about that park next door or park across the street. We all know those folks that really care about their neighborhood and about their park. We can work with safety. We're not putting a fine point on what types of improvements people want to see. It's going to be community-driven and community-led. So if there's anybody that you know of in your wards, get them in touch, get that contact information to Bridget. We will follow up and make sure that if we need to walk them through the submission, again, it's only 2 questions to get it in, we'll do that.
As Councilwoman Sims, as you know very well, I mean, this is all about building a relationship. It's not a transaction. Yeah. And I'm really glad that you raised that point, that if we look upon this as, well, it's just a one and done, it's not going to work. It's not sustainable. And as you know, and Councilman Freeman, Councilwoman Somerville, I mean, you guys have been there every step of the way. And so I can commit to you that we're here for the long haul. I mean, you know that. We're not leaving. We care about these assets, and we want to work with the community. But you're right, absolutely, it's going to take time. And one of the things we learned is trust. We've got to work on that, and equity is really important. And so I know that under Bridget's leadership, we'll be listening and seeking understanding, and really working hard to identify the needs. But we're here for the long haul.
A couple things come to mind. One of the best examples I've experienced when it comes to our parks and getting people involved is when a community builds a kaboom project. I mean, it truly does engage and involve everyone. But after you build that project, you need to have a way, you need people who take ownership. And usually when those people are able to participate in the process, then they take ownership of this. I would like, before something is really announced as far as who that group is, I would love for, I know from my ward, I would like to see that list before you say these are the people, because we've got people, one that comes to mind is a gentleman, Jack's his first name, over in the Ellet area, who...
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, some people may want to, but there's no one I know that's more passionate about a park than him. I would hope we would have a seat for someone like him in every ward. Those people who are taking care of the park before it's vogue, before there's money, they're doing it because they care about the community. I'm thinking of Deontay Brunson and God's Chosen Ones. This is a group that took money out of their pocket, designed the park, painted it, and made it friendly. People who were doing this before we had the resources, I'm hoping. And then I have to go back to the Park and Rec Advisory Group, because they spoke about, in some of the meetings that I've been able to attend, ways to not just do a project, but to sustain it. Because if this is dependent on our budget, we know what our challenges are. But discussions there have been about sustaining a project. And one of the, just to give you an idea, one of the discussions was to just have people dream about what they want inside their parks. Identifying how we can infuse art and all those different things. Yeah. And some of you may see, people are kind of changing the way they memorialize their loved ones. That not everybody's putting people in the ground now. They're taking their ashes and making art out of them, or doing different things. So that group had talked about, rather than putting a headstone in the cemetery, identifying art and things throughout the community that people could purchase to memorialize, because that's the way you can sustain something all the way through. So I'm just running off some things, you know, and then I've got the idea that you weren't, this present administration wasn't here, but I'm thinking of the children from Brookville that came here, and they did a study and presented to us what they wanted to see in the actual rec centers and in the park. So the key is this citizen group part. So what I'm asking is before something announced as an official citizens group, that we as council, those of us that know our wards, can say, hey, you're missing somebody here. Okay, so that it really does have the full representation from the ward.
So, Mr. Chair, absolutely. As I said before, we will be sharing all of the submissions with all of council. So you will be able to see those before we even go into round 2, which again is not an onerous process, but we absolutely want you to vet them and say we missed somebody, or to say this person's ready to go. I don't, you know, to help us, because you know your wards better than anybody. So that will be done for sure. The other thing I want to address all of your comments. The other is this is absolutely not to supplant the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. They have a broader scope, and I know the mayor's asked them to look into a few things. This is really focused, again, on creating the capacity to steward a network of citizens across the city who want to stay involved with their park and sustain it, because you're absolutely right. Part of the impetus for this is that we will never have the amount of money necessary to do everything we need to do in the parks. The good news is we have a lot of parkland. The challenging news is that we have a lot of parkland. And so we're never going to see realize the vision that our citizens have unless they themselves help us to steward it. So you're absolutely right on that. The other thing is about the groups you talked about not making sure we recognize those that have already stepped up. And I want to tell you that we believe we've designed a process not only to make sure we recognize them, but to actually give that deference. So I go back to, again, the 2 questions we're asking: what's your vision? Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, what's your vision and how are you the person to help get it done? The emphasis is almost all on question 2. We're not looking for anybody. In fact, it's probably not a good idea for somebody or an organization to step up and say, I've got the answer, because we haven't engaged the community. It's about engaging the community. What we want is for people to demonstrate that they have engaged the community. They can bring the right people to the table, right being however they define it, and make sure that the process is legitimate. So it's actually weighed to support those who have already stepped up. And the last thing I want to say, because when you said Bookto, it dawned on me. I said to you, Councilman Freeman, that we're not exempting we're not exempting any city park. But there are open lands, public lands in our neighborhoods that aren't city parks that are absolutely phenomenal, and the front yard of Bookto High School is one of them. It's not a city park, but it's a beautiful open space. So I think I would go a little step further, that we obviously want to steward our city parks, and there's a lot of them, but if there's a beautiful open public space, whether it's the front yard of a school, I'm thinking Jennings as well, you know, it's not technically a city park, but it's a public land, I think we're more than willing, again, to take a look at that, and we'll share that with all of council.
Thank you. Any more questions from members of council or members of committee? Mr. Fusco?
Yeah, I assume that where our community centers sit, sometimes there's large tracts of land that they sit on. I assume those are in play as well?
Yes, so again, the whole purpose here is to get the community engaged, so we don't want to put a fine point on anything. Have people submit. We'll share it with all of council. We'll work with council and then the selection committee to whittle it down. But correct, if it's a public land and it's park-like and it's used in that way, it's open.
Well, when you said that, just one more thing came to mind, and I don't know if this is a proper term, but I thought of pocket parks. And there's been discussions that people say, we may have land that's not ready to be developed with a house or anything, but we've got a lot of, you know, the key word was green space. For those of us with a lot of them, they're just vacant lots. That could be creative areas until something's ready to be done as well. So hopefully those will be in play too.
Absolutely in play. The only thing I would say is, again, we have a lot of city park land.
Right.
And so I think we want to always be careful working with you and ward council members to be very judicious in increasing the amount of land that we steward, because we're having trouble stewarding what we've got right now.
Well, I say that because we have mentioned this. We usually use the term food deserts, but when we've closed some of our schools, what we've in essence created is, I'll say, recreation deserts, and I'm going to use my ward as an example, from Delia to Copley, from Hawkins all the way up to Exchange Street. There isn't a park in that swatch of land. Well, you can use, let me back up. You have Snyder Park. I apologize, but when I talk about a park, there's a playground.
Yes.
You know, because when they closed Rankin,
I see what you're saying.
There's nothing there. So that's why I bring that up.
It's a good point. And the only other thing I would say is, again, we don't want to limit anyone to submit anything. If it's not a fit for the Akron Parks Collaborative or the Akron Parks Challenge, we could reach out to Let's Grow Akron or any one of our numerous organizations that, you know, if it's a community garden project or something that doesn't fit exactly, that doesn't mean we can't assist in some way.
Okay.
That's what I was going to add, James, is that's what we've learned with Akron Civic Commons, is that, particularly around Summit Lake, there are green open spaces. The answer shouldn't always be just let's create another park. It could be urban agriculture, and under Lisa Nunn's leadership, she is looking to expand her urban agricultural program, which then obviously then leads to job creation. And so there's all sorts of benefits that are spinoffs from this, and really, it's your point, Councilman, it could be an urban garden as well.
Oh, excuse me, let me back up. No, when I think about it, there isn't a park in that spot, because the only park was Rankin. I'm saying between Copley and Delia. You made me think of Snyder Park when I saw Mr. Valley go like this. Yeah, but no, Will Christie isn't in there either. That's what I mean, is,
Yeah.
you know, so we don't think about it, but when they closed down Rankin, and then they took the swings off of there,
Yeah.
there's nothing. That's why I said the park. I'm sorry, Mr. Swirsky.
Well, just, I've heard some criteria talked about. One is equity. A second is a person with a demonstrated track record of bringing people together, mobilizing people in their community. What other criteria are there? Is that right, that those are two of the criteria, equity, leadership that has a track record of mobilizing people successfully? Are
Yes.
there other criteria in your selection process?
Yeah, that's essentially it for round one. Following the Knights Cities Challenge model, the Knights Arts Challenge model, we want to create a bar that's achievable for anyone, so we didn't want some long, drawn-out grant process. We want to be able to get as many submissions as possible. And then the second round, I will be happy to, in fact, oh, Bridget's got them right here. Bridget can provide here. So the two questions, I've been paraphrasing it, but when you go to the website, the two questions are: share with us your community's vision, your community's vision about how we might reimagine your favorite city park that is accessible and welcoming for all residents and visitors. And the second question is: share with us why you or your neighborhood should facilitate this Akron Parks Challenge process. And again, the emphasis is really on ability to bring people together. It's not that you have to have the absolute correct vision. In fact, again, it's probably not a good idea to say, I've got it and I've been wanting to do this for, that's a good place to start, but we want to make sure that as much as possible the neighborhood has a chance to weigh in, and we do it in a thoughtful way. The second round, which I will share with council members, the draft questions that we've come up with, are really focused, again, on fleshing out that demonstrated ability. It's not about having the grant acumen to know exactly how to go about it. That's what Civic Commons is going to help with. It's not about knowing, oh my gosh, I don't know how to put on a meeting. That's what Bridget's here to do. So we have the resources to help that person or that neighborhood group facilitate the process. So it's 7 questions that we will actually work with the finalists or the semifinalists, however we define them, but those that make the first cut, we will work them to fill that out so that we get as much information as possible. So the idea here is to, again, you're right, Councilman, the emphasis is really on demonstrated ability to bring your neighborhood together and a demonstrated passion for your park. That's really the bar.
Okay, but you just mentioned 7 other questions. Did I hear you say?
So without getting in the weeds, we're working on a round 2 based upon the Knights Cities Challenge, Knights Arts Challenge, which is 7 questions that essentially get at, again, how can you demonstrate to us that you're going to bring the neighborhood together? Are you going to be committed with us through the whole process and even afterward to continue to steward and work with us on your park? So these are not specific questions of like, give us your 501c3 or give us, it's much more about demonstrating your ability to be with us in this process, be effective in the process, and be able to bring your neighborhood together. But we will share those draft, they're still in draft form. We will share those with council to provide feedback. But again, they're not meant to be a bridge too far. They're just, and Bridget will work with each of those semifinalists or finalists to determine the answers we need to get the information.
Would the person then be selected and expected to do their work on a volunteer basis, or would there be some compensation as the way foundations do for good projects?
As we contemplate it now, it would be on a volunteer basis. Bridget is there to do any sort of legwork that neighborhood group or that individual would need. And then again, the idea, as Bridget and Dan have said, is that person or that organization grows through the process. And so it's not just one person, it's a neighborhood that comes together and ultimately does it. So it's a very good point. I'm not saying it's not something we could look at in the future, but I know my experience, I don't know Bridget and Dan, but my experience is in other cities that have developed fully built out Friends of the City Parks networks. They are typically volunteer driven with maybe a staff lead or 2 that helps to steward those around the city.
I tell you what, this will be our last question, Ms. Sims.
So just to try and avoid unintended consequences. Recently we had the commission of the art pieces and some folks felt left out, as you know. So I just hate for that to happen again. So my question is, why didn't we consider doing smaller grants and do north, south, east, and west to make sure that every part of the city had an opportunity to be engaged in this? Again, I go back to, there are some communities that have been underempowered for so long, really getting them activated to know this is really about them. We worked a long time to get people to come off Miller Avenue to come down to Summit Lake because they didn't think that was really about them. And so why didn't we kind of think in that vein? I'm just wondering.
Sure. So again, the idea is to make a substantial impact, recognizing that we have overpromised and underdelivered over the years, especially in many communities. What we didn't want to do is go into a community, get everyone very excited, do the visioning process, and then not be able to implement because we only have $25,000 per park or something like that. Because, you know, I'm amazed every day at what people are doing, cities are doing in their parks all across the country. And there are things that are happening that are well beyond recreation as we contemplate it, well beyond even vendor engagement as we contemplate it. So we didn't want to put a limit, I guess, or at least try not to put too low a limit on the imagination of the neighborhoods that we want to work with through the Akron Parks Challenge, knowing that whether you're in the Akron Parks Challenge, selected for the Akron Parks Challenge or not, we want to work with you. So we are going to follow up on every submission to at least identify if we can do anything to support their idea, wherever appropriate. It's, again, the end goal isn't to necessarily, you know, focus solely on the Akron Parks Challenge. It's really on the partnership to create the overall Friends of the City Parks network for any city park across the city. So in that vein, no one is left out. We are ready today. If there's somebody who's like, I'm not interested in the Parks Challenge, but I know exactly what I want to do. I've had my group of folks together for years, and I want to get going on this, we can do that today. There's absolutely nothing stopping us. So I think that a lot of it is just wanting to make sure that we can deliver in a substantial way to make a real impact in a park. Things are not cheap, and so some things are. But a lot of what we anticipate coming through potentially is you know, has a cost to it, and we want to get that imagination flowing. And so we decided that, you know, $100,000 for 2 parks, especially with the staff capacity we had, we want to do this process right. You know, we only have, if you think about it, one staff person that's going to really steward this, and then our time as well to do more than 2 parks. There was a concern that we would stretch ourselves too thin and basically not do the level of deep community engagement we want to see. Again, though, that's not to say that if we look at the submissions and we come down to it and the selection committee says, you know what, we think we can do this, that it's not a possibility. But we wanted to make sure, especially in the first year, that we did the process right, that we learned from it by being fully engaged, and that we gave those 2 communities the time and the energy and the resources to fully imagine what they want to see and do everything we can.
You know, I get mesmerized when I listen to you talk because it's so good, right? But I want to point out too the opportunity around partnerships. You know, when I think about the Kaboom projects, when I look at United Way and all the energy and resources they put into that, that wasn't really about finances as much as it was the partnerships. In each side of the city, there are partners potentially, corporations, organizations that could have been a part of this that would have allowed us to do that could have done some of that heavy lifting at the same time. I think you mentioned earlier, we've been at this for 3 years, so there are some things that we do know. I just think it just would have appeared to be a lot more, I don't want to use the word fair, or people really felt like there was an opportunity for that to be spread out and everybody would have an opportunity to really have their park identified.
I think your point is well taken. We have 161 city parks.
Yeah, I was just saying.
And so we knew going into this that it was an impossible task from the standpoint of the Parks Challenge to make everybody happy. But I can commit to this council that equity is a lens we have on right now. We want to make sure the process is legitimate. We're going to share all those submissions with council members and get your feedback. Bridget is ready to go today, not just on getting the word out on the Parks Challenge, but if you want to get started on something today and forming a friends group, we can do that now. And so I guess I'll end on Dan's point, which is the absolute best one, is we are in this for the long haul. We believe in public space in this administration. We want to work with citizens to co-design it and co-steward those public spaces for years to come.
Okay, thank you. I want us to wrap up. One thing, and I heard you loud and clear, one thing I don't want us to run into is because two sides of the community get picked first, and you have different communities that all have the same aspiration for their wards, it doesn't make sense for the city to have a water park in every ward. So at some point, there needs to be each ward has their group, then there needs to be a representative, a true representative from that ward that's part of that master group, so that, you know, the community could really say where they want these things to go. And then one last thing, I heard the people that were part of the advisory group, and I'm not just saying this because I'm the Park and Rec chair, but whenever we have a committee and it deals with housing, it deals with Park and Rec, it deals with whatever, the chair, because we're selected by our peers, should be a part of that advisory group. So I happen to be the Park and Rec group. So the group that, I know you said our president, but the president's main thing is to facilitate and manage council's business, but we pick our chairs because they have an understanding of the goals and objectives of council. So I'm lobbying for myself to be on there, but I shouldn't, even if I wasn't the chair, just out of respect for
Sure.
whoever the chair is in whatever department on council, they should be a part of it.
Sure. So just want to respond real quick, and then I know Bridget might want to have a few words on. So the other cities, as it relates to making sure that all of those, you're absolutely right that all those friends groups meet up. I'll use Philadelphia as an example. They have literally over 1,000 independent friends groups. They convene them all together twice a year, and it's amazing because they inform the plan. So it comes up from the grassroots, and a beautiful thing is that whether you live in a rich part of the town or you live in a lower income part of the town, they all come together twice a year, share resources, share expertise, and help each other out across their parks. It's wonderful. And the second thing is we absolutely weren't trying to exclude anyone. We definitely want to make sure that the process is as fair and unbiased as possible, given that we do have 10 wards. That was the reason we asked Council President Somerville to serve on the selection committee representing council. But again, no disrespect, we'll make sure you get all the information. If you want to be a part of that, that's not a problem to me. We just want to make sure, above all things, that all of your colleagues feel that the process, because keep in mind we're only going to pick 2 this first year, that everybody at the end of the day feels like the process was fair and that we're getting out to everybody's ward as best we can.
Thank you very much for coming before us. If there aren't any more questions, and out of respect of the other business we have to conduct this afternoon, we'll consider ourselves adjourned.
Public utilities will start in 2 minutes.
This is for council members to watch a meeting together. Citizen. Watch a movie.
If we could call public utilities to order. Public utilities. Councilman Kilby, Swartzky, Polk, and Freeman are all present. If we could get approval of our last meeting minutes. All in favor? So we have some a previous legislation we have to address first, and that is the ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service or his designee, after publicly advertising for bids, to enter into a contract or contracts for the painting of fire hydrants in the city and declaring an emergency. We took time for this for 2 weeks to give someone the opportunity to reach out to Mr. Moore or Mr. Ludlow. My understanding, no one has done that, so I am making a motion if I can get a motion for suspension of rules. Is that what you need?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. We'll bring that in this evening. New legislation, ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent without the formality of publicly advertising for bids to enter into a contract with Bearing Distributors, Inc. for the purchase of 3 Nord primary tank gearboxes and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Down at the water reclamation facility in our primary tanks, we have upgraded half of the 24 gearboxes to meet the new standard. So this is going to allow us to buy 3 more. We've been doing all this work in-house with our own staff. We're doing 3 to 5 a year, and then our goal is to remove them all and upgrade them. They're about 40 years old. Bearing Distributors is Canton, but they're our local distributor, and we are sole sourcing these because when we have bid them, they have always been the lowest price and to meet our spec.
Okay. Any questions from committee? Mr. Kilby?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Ludlow, let me get this, just for curiosity, are these the gears that open up the gates at these, what are they exactly?
The primary tanks of what they used to be was all metal parts in there, the chains, the scraping of the sludge to move the sludge.
Okay.
Well, Vince and his staff have upgraded all that to plastic parts,
Okay.
plastic chains, which we're getting. We used to have 4 people assigned to the primary tanks. We don't have anybody assigned. We only repair as they break. So this has reduced our maintenance tremendously.
So this is like preventative maintenance?
Well, this is ongoing maintenance. We
Okay.
have to run these tanks. But like I said, we used to have 4 employees that only worked on these 24 tanks because the things broke so often. And by upgrading this between Vince and Tom Smith and their staff, we've reduced it.
So these are what circulates the sludge and stuff? Is that what they do?
It basically goes from east to west. It's what's scraping off the bottom.
Oh, it moves it, okay.
Yes.
So I see at the end here, it says there's a required gear drives to contain explosive-proof motors. I mean, who's requiring us to do that? Is that
The state, what we
state?
call PERP, they come through.
Okay.
And they look at these type of things, even though they're in open air.
Yeah.
They're over top the tanks.
Right.
We've never had a problem, but the new standard is
Yeah.
to go to a totally enclosed motor where there's no open frame, there's no sparks as the motor's running.
So that they're probably worried about maybe there could be methane there or something? Is that?
That's what they say, yes.
Okay.
We've
All
never
right.
had a problem though, sir.
Yeah. All right, well, hey, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Consent's fine, right?
Mr. Swirsky? No, Any questions from council?
Consent's fine.
Consent's fine. Okay, can I get a motion for?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it. Number 4, ordinance authorizing the purchasing agent without formality of publicly advertising for bids to enter into a contract with Seltzer Pump Services, Inc. for additional repairs on 4 vertical turbine pumps at the Akron Water Plant and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Up at Kent at our water supply plant, we brought legislation into you recently, and we have 6 pumps that actually provide our water. We have 4 25 million gallon a day pumps and 2 15 million gallon a day pumps. So when we put the legislation in, we're going to start repairing them, which they are 48 years old. When we broke down the first 2, the impellers were bad, and they're $80,000 a piece. So since we have the motors and the pumps apart, we're going to replace these, And it does require some extra shaft work when we replace these impellers. So that's why we have to increase the repair price of this legislation.
Okay. All righty, any questions from committee members? Mr. Kilby?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Luttle, just out of curiosity, how many pumps do we have running at any one time?
Pretty much we can run on 2.
Okay, we can run on 2?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Questions from council?
Consent's fine.
Consent's fine. Can I get a motion for consent? So moved. All in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it. We don't have anything else coming before us. We are adjourned.
Health and Social Services will meet in 1 minute. I'd like to call to order the Health and Social Services Committee. For the record, we have all members present with the exception of Councilwoman Amobian. Continue to take time. Motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting, please. So moved. And a second? Second. And all in favor? Aye. Thank you. And we continue to take time on our old items. We have one new item before us. This is a resolution establishing April 15th, 2018, the International Awareness for Pompe Disease as Ayani Rogers Day in the city of Akron, and urging all citizens to be aware of their genetic history and declaring an emergency. Mr. Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Back in early January, Charlotte Byers wrote a letter to the mayor explaining in that letter that she lost her granddaughter, Ayani Rogers, of Pompe disease. And mayor asked that we reach out to the family and talk with them and figure out how we could get some more information on this and bring in a resolution. The family will be here this evening. We're also looking at possibly some type of memorial at one of our parks over on the east side of Akron. And like I said, the family will be here this evening, and I will yield to Tamika Rose, who has some information on the Pompe disease.
Okay, thank you. Let me, before you proceed, will there be somebody here tonight to address this?
The mother and the grandparents will be here tonight.
Okay, will there be anybody on our side to address this and just present?
We'll be here tonight.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I wanted to say that Pompe disease is an enzyme deficiency that causes glycogen buildup and leads to muscle and respiratory damage, and it affects about 1 in 4,000 people. So it's a very rare disease. However, Ms. Byers wanted to make sure that all families were aware of their genetic history, because she was not aware that her daughter had the her granddaughter, well, her daughter and had the actual, carried the gene that then imposed for her to have a mate that had the same gene that then made it for her granddaughter to have it. It's very similar to how sickle cell disease works, but it doesn't look like that. But it's just, you know, if your parent has the gene and the other parent has half of the gene, and then there's a 1/4% chance that you will be able to have this disease. So this young lady ended up having the disease. Some women, some people actually go on to college and live lives, but they do have a disability. They are wheelchair bound. Unfortunately, this young lady passed away at 15 months.
No. Questions or comments? Mr. Fusco.
Sorry. The one thing, Mr. Valley, and I was very sorry to hear, you know, about this and reading it over, but in terms of like memorials, and I don't know how far, or exactly what, if there is a plan, exact plan or not, Mr. Valley, but I can tell you this, and that is that this council, a couple of years back, we had passed, and I don't think we've used it as of yet, a method in which trees can be planted in the name of those who've passed before, and an inventory would be kept by the service director's office. The tree ordinance that we had passed a couple of years back, there is a procedure in place for that can recognize people, and I would recommend maybe reviewing that and looking at that option.
Thank you, Mr. Fusco. That's a good point, but there is a whereas that says Mayor Horrigan and staff are working on a memorial to recognize Yanni Rogers at an East Akron Park location. That'll be a conversation we'll have with the family after the resolution's passed tonight in the next month or two, and get some ideas and see what they would like to do moving forward.
Other questions? Ms. Sims?
So I think I read that there were, it's so rare as like 10 to somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people in the country that has it, and that there's limited, very limited understanding of the muscular disease. Is that true?
That is true. There is a young lady, Megan Crowley, who was diagnosed with Pompe disease, and she was diagnosed actually at 15 months, and her father, John Crowley, has been a fierce advocate all the way up to the President of the United States today, and they met with President Trump in February to make it so that they can actually have more genetic testing done and to see where the gene is, to see that they could be genome therapy to help alleviate some of the symptoms of the disease.
So currently, is there a test that people can take to see if they are genetically inclined, or?
It appears that they can take the test to see if they have that gene. I don't know how it would, how you could take that test to see if you had it. I think it's something you could take it to see if you had it, just a sickle cell, but you would have to request it, and I'm not sure if that's something that insurance companies would pay for now, but I know that they are testing infants when they are born now at Akron Children's Hospital as a result of Yanni.
So, okay, so there is a screen that they currently can do, but you have to request it?
So,
I was kind of wondering what mom is advocating for. Is she advocating for us to know our genetic markers or propensity towards this, and so what is she advocating for? That every child born in Akron is screened for it, or is there just?
So I think in her, she's even, from what I've gathered from Mr. Valley, is that she's emailed and reached out to everyone in this, in her quest, and Akron Children's Hospital has now begun to do those tests on infants, and I believe she said that I don't want to misquote her, but there have been several infants since that time that they have found out, and they've been able to help those individuals a little bit more because they didn't know anything about Pompe disease. And so this was something that was so rare that the hospital had never seen it before. And just to make people aware of this disease in the city of Akron.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Do you have a motion? Okay. We have a motion to approve suspension of the rules. We can go. This is. Okay. We have a second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye. Aye. Okay. Thank you. And then look forward to hearing from the family this evening. Thanks so much. And we are adjourned.
Okay, call Housing Committee to session. I think all members are present except Samples. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Okay, vote. We have to vote on that? Aye. Okay, we have a one piece of legislation here, nothing on the old agenda. It's just a resolution to acknowledge the 50th anniversary of the enactment of the Fair Housing Act and declaring an emergency. Any questions from the committee first? If none, anyone else? Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. Appreciate the committee looking this over, considering this. A number of cities throughout Northeast Ohio have passed similar resolutions. The thing of it is the Akron Area Board of Realtors basically came to us asking for this, and I believe that this is something that we should pass, that is good for the city to recognize that our local realtors are working with those that are realtors to educate them on issues such as this in terms of discrimination, in terms of what you can and cannot do. Also the history. I attended it was basically a luncheon. However, though, the keynote speaker had talked about this very same issue. This was about a year or so ago. And so, like I said, the Akron Area Board of Realtors, they schedule training events, part of their educational process for continuing education. This is part of it, and I think in terms of making sure that that discrimination does not happen in our city of Akron, it would be prudent for us to go on the record and say that we appreciate what the Board of Realtors have done, the Akron-Cleveland Area Board of Realtors, in terms of recognizing the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, and I certainly realize that we have a ways to go. There is statistics out there where, home ownership for many minorities have not increased. As a matter of fact, in some cases have declined. And so I think this would be a good statement for the city of Akron to make in terms of passing this, and certainly would welcome council as a whole. Thank you.
I agree with that. Is there anyone else that has a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a second. Committee members first. Zach, you want to say something? You're not on the committee, are you? Okay, that's okay. You'll get to talk.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have my name added to
Okay,
this.
we'll do that. Anybody else on the committee? All right, Councilwoman Sims? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just real quickly. It's been a while, but Ms. Sims might be surprised to hear this. I was on the board of Fair Housing Compact Service. I don't know. This might be. But this is great work and great leadership of the people who drew up this resolution, and I'm proud to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to maybe council as a whole tonight.
Okay. Let the record reflect that Councilwoman Samples is present. Okay, Ms. Sims?
I just wanted to say thank you to my colleague for bringing forth the resolution. It's really consistent with most recently was it this beginning of this week or was it last week, they had the Beloved Community ceremony where we did a signing to support the Beloved Communities, really about equity, opportunity, and fighting against those very things that Dr. Martin Luther King stood for, to make sure that people had access to good, fair housing. So I think this is consistent with many of us who signed the pledge, and I too would like my name added. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Anyone else want to say anything? I just want to say this is very important that we recognize this. We have our own local ordinance that expands it a little bit. I think I was watching something on television recently about the assassination of Martin Luther King, and I think they said, if anyone else knows anything about this, his assassination was kind of like the impetus that got this through Congress, because I think it was sitting in Congress for a long time, and I guess it's something good came out of something tragic, if that's the case. So, does anyone else have anything they want to say? Okay, with that, I'll make does anyone have a motion for a
motion?
Motion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any nays? Okay, with that, we'll pass this tonight.